Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think most of you know that ultrafine-grained and nanocrystalline microstructures and metals have superior mechanical properties, like, for example, ultra-high yield strength and also enhanced fatigue performance. However, when we get cracks or defects in our microstructures, the situation can change and it could be a real drawback for some application. So that's why I focus on the fatigue crack growth behavior of pure ultrafine-grained metals. So when we usually do fatigue tests, we start with quite perfect specimens and we cyclically load it, and what we measure are the number of cycles which is needed for crack initiation and crack propagation until failure. When we now take away this first step and we artificially introduce cracks, we do fatigue crack growth tests and we monitor the crack propagation until failure. So for just a few words on our materials. In our nanocrystalline and ultrafine-grained metals, what we get is ultra-high yield strength and fracture strength. And also good ductility is possible. And also we can see that studies find improved fatigue performance. However, when we have a look at the fatigue crack growth behavior, the majority of studies report lower resistance against fatigue crack growth and faster fatigue crack growth for smaller grain sizes in the near threshold regime. So for example, like shown here for nickel, we see that we have slower fatigue crack growth in microcrystalline nickel than in ultrafine-grained and nanocrystalline nickel. So this could be a real drawback when we expect that components could get cracks during the service, also during the production. So that's why I would like to focus on this near threshold behavior of these ultrafine-grained metals and tell you a bit about the reasons and our findings on these materials. So I did my studies on ultrafine-grained nickel and iron, which was produced by high-pressure torsion, like shown here. By severely plastically deforming these materials, we get severe grain refinement. So we have grain sizes of about 400 nanometers for nickel and about 300 nanometers for iron. And this is accompanied by a significant increase in the yield strength, as can be seen here. So to our experiment procedure, what people usually do for measuring fatigue crack growth is using the load shedding method. So we start at quite high delta K and reduce it until they see that no crack growth is detectable anymore, so we get the threshold value. However, we started at the other side, so we do the load rising method where we started at lower delta K values. So how is this done? We start with a compression pre-crack, like shown here. We then start with low loading forces, where we see no crack extension, like shown here in this region here. We then increase our load amplitude until we see first crack extension, and this point here is the effective threshold. The cracks then can stop, and we need to further increase our delta K to get further crack extension. We do this again and again until we reach this point here, and this is the long crack threshold, which is usually also measured in the load shedding method. So from just this last part here, we get our fatigue crack growth curve, like also in the load shedding process. However, we can also get very interesting information about this part here with our load rising method, so the cyclic R curve behavior shown here. So let's come to some results of my studies. What I find for microcrystalline iron is that it quite well shows the classic R curve behavior. So that's very comparable to our schematic here. But when we have a look at the ultrafine-grained iron, what we see is that we don't see this R curve behavior, but we get no observable crack extension until we reach the long crack threshold, where the crack starts to grows until failure. So when we show this in form of the cyclic R curve, this would be an example for the microcrystalline iron. So that's a classical cyclic R curve. However, for the ultrafine-grained iron, we see that this changes and it seems to get much steeper than for the microcrystalline microstructure. So how can this be explained? Well, for the microcrystalline iron, due to our compression pre-cracking, we start with an open pre-crack because we have residual stresses and tension. So low crack closure mechanism should be active. When we reach the threshold stress, the effective threshold, the pre-crack starts to grow. However, the crack can stop again when the crack closure evolves because the load at the crack tip gets reduced. So that's this classical behavior here. Now, here we are. So now for the ultrafine grained iron, we don't see these steps here where the crack starts to grow and stops again. So what's the reason for that? We don't think that there's no crack closure active, but that we just cannot detect the small crack extension at the beginning. So we have a resolution for our measurement technique of about 1 to 3 microns. So it seems that these little crack extensions are just smaller than our detection limit. So what we get in the end is just a very steep arc curve, very steep cyclic arc curve. Why is that the case? Well, the crack closure evolves when a crack propagates through the plastic zone. And the sizes of the plastic zone are quite different for the microcrystalline microstructure, where we have a cyclic plastic zone size of about 50 micron. And for the ultrafine grained iron, we have a plastic zone size of about 1 micron. So we see that already from these figures, it would be expected that the crack extension in this arc curve regime is quite small, so we can't detect it anymore. So let's come to another interesting topic for this ultrafine grained metals, the mean stress dependency. So what we usually see in our microcrystalline microstructures is this mean stress dependency, that we have a lower threshold and high fatigue crack growth rate for higher mean stresses, like shown here, for example. So at lower R ratios, we get higher threshold values and slower fatigue crack growth. So there's quite a difference. When we have a look at our ultrafine grained nickel, for example, we see that we have much smaller mean stress dependency. The same is also true for iron, where we see the same tendency that we have a smaller mean stress dependency in our ultrafine grained microstructure. So what's the reason for this? Well, basically, crack corrosion mechanisms reduce the load at the crack tip, so it gets to premature contact of the crack faces during unloading. So we don't have this full delta K range anymore acting at the crack tip, but the reduced ones are effective delta K. Thereby, we need a higher global delta K for the crack tip to experience the same delta K. So basically, this curve, what we measure here, is shifted to higher delta K values due to server contributions of crack closure. For the higher mean stresses, we also have higher delta CTOD, higher crack tip opening displacements, and therefore the contributions of the crack closure much reduced. So we measure more like this curve here without the crack closure contribution. So now let's have a look why we have less crack closure contribution for our ultrafine grained metals. Well, one possibility would be that we have oxide-induced crack closure. However, no oxide particles or debris are visible on the fracture surface, so it's easy to think that this is reduced. It's getting more interesting for roughness-induced crack closure. In microcrystalline metals, we have quite a rough crack path, especially when we compare it to the crack path in ultrafine grained metals. So from that alone, one could already say, well, okay, of course, then we have less roughness-induced crack closure. However, when we have a closer look at our roughness of the ultrafine grained iron, we see that we have roughnesses and asperities in the range of about a few hundred nanometers. And this is comparable or even larger than the crack tip opening displacement at quite high delta K values. So from that, we would actually expect a pronounced crack closure contribution. However, it's not only necessary to have a certain roughness, but also we need displacement in mode 2 direction, because if we wouldn't have this mode 2 displacement, the sides of the crack would fit perfectly into each other, and so we wouldn't get the crack closure. And it was shown by simulation works that this displacement is reduced in ultrafine grained metals, because on the one hand we have a smaller size of this plastic zone, And on the other hand, we also have a more symmetric dislocation movement of information. So it's not just the roughness and the size of the roughness and disparities, but also this reduced mode 2 displacement that leads to a reduced roughness-induced crack closure part of fine grain. Another contribution is the plasticity-induced crack closure. So under plane stress, under plane strain in microcrystalline metals, what we get are dislocations which are left behind in the crack plate and which can exert stress on the crack and lead to crack closure. In our nanocrystalline and ultrafine grain metals, what we observe is actually pronounced grain coarsening. And so I think that the cycloplastic zone gets larger and more dislocations can return to the crack, and therefore there are less stored dislocations left in the crack plate, which in fact results in reduced plasticity-induced crack closure. So that's an example of how the microstructure looks around the crack tip. Lighter grains are the larger grains, so we can quite easily see that we have grain coarsening around the crack tip. We also did nano-indentation around the crack tip, and we see basically the same results here. So we get softening around the crack tip, and therefore it seems that we also get a reduced contribution of plasticity-induced crack closure. So in ultrafine grained iron or ultrafine grained metals, we see that we have a smaller contribution of crack closure, and therefore less mean stress dependency, because all these contributions seem to be reduced. So the fatigue crack growth of this ultrafine grained metals in the near threshold regime seems to be worse than their coarser grain counterparts. However, when we have a look at higher delta K values, so in this region here, what we found is that we can get similar or even a higher resistance against fatigue crack growth. So basically, we have these problems here in the near threshold regime. However, at higher delta K, it's not that bad actually. Okay, so with that, I will leave you with my summary, and thank you for your attention.